It is 8:40 on a Wednesday morning, and I am staring at our house savings account, the one my husband and I have been building for 6 years toward the down payment on our dream home, and the balance reads $412. There should be tens of thousands in it. The last time I looked, I remember the exact number, because I'd smiled at it, thinking we were almost there. This is the account Kyle and I have fed every single month for 6 years. Every bonus, every tax refund, every let's skip the vacation this year and put it toward the house. It is the most concrete thing in our entire marriage. The proof that we were building a future together, brick by saved up brick, month after patient month. And this morning, it is nearly empty $412 where a future used to be, and I am the one staring at it. And I did not take the money out. I'm going to tell you exactly where every dollar of our dream went. I'm going to tell you what I did about it over the next 5 days. But I want you to sit in this moment with me first, the moment a woman looks at 6 years of a shared future reduced to $400 and understands, before she even has a single detail, that the future was never quite as shared as she believed. Before I go on, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. If you discovered, in a single morning, that your partner had quietly spent the future you were both building, the house fund, the savings, the someday, on someone else, what would your very first move be? Confront them? Cry? Or go quiet and start figuring out exactly what you're going to do? Be honest, because the move I made in the next 5 days is the whole reason this story ends with me holding the keys to a future and him holding nothing at all. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And before the 5 days begin, I want to say one thing to anyone watching who is staring at their own version of that account this morning. The feeling in your chest right now, that free fall, that sick vertigo of watching a shared future turn out to be a fiction, I promise you it is survivable, and I promise you it is not the end of your story. It feels like the end because the future you'd planned just died in front of you. But the future you'd planned was partly built on someone else's lie, which means it was never as solid as the grief makes it feel. What comes next can be built on something better, the truth, and your own 2 hands. I know that's hard to believe in the free fall. Hold on anyway. The account balance is not the measure of your future. What you do in the next 5 days is. Day 1. The account. 6 years. I want that number to sit with you, because it's the real currency of this story. Not the dollars, the years. 6 years of 2 people choosing, over and over, the future over the present. 6 years of small denials that only make sense if you believe in what you're saving toward. That account wasn't money to me. It was every vacation we didn't take, every dinner out we skipped, every soon we told ourselves. It was the most patient hope of my adult life, kept in a single login. I found it by accident, which is how you find these things. I'd logged in to transfer our usual monthly contribution, the same boring, hopeful little ritual I'd done for 6 years, and the number on the screen simply did not make sense. $412. I refreshed it. I logged out and back in. I checked I was looking at the right account. And slowly, coldly, it sank in that I was. The money was gone. Not some of it. Almost all of it. Years of sacrifice, of skipped vacations and clipped budgets, and not yet, soon withdrawn in a series of transactions I had never seen. Because Kyle was the one who'd set up the alerts, and he'd set them to come only to him. Now, here is the most important decision I made in this entire story, and I made it in the first 10 minutes, standing in my kitchen with my coffee going cold. I did not call Kyle. I did not call him at work screaming. Because some clear, cold instinct told me that the moment he knew I'd seen the account, the story would start changing. There'd be an explanation. I was going to tell you. A reason. A fog. Right now, he had no idea I knew. And that ignorance was the most valuable thing I owned. I learned something in those first 10 minutes that I'd want every person watching to carry with them. Just in case. The instinct, when you discover something like this, is to demand answers immediately, because the not knowing feels unbearable, and you want it to stop. But here is the truth. You already have the answer. The account told you. The only thing a confrontation gets you, in that first raw moment, is a head start handed to the person who wronged you time and warning to move money. Build a story, delete a trail, lawyer up first. Your silence is not weakness and it is not denial. Your silence is a head start that belongs to you instead of to them. I chose to keep my head start. Everything good that happened over the next 5 days flowed from that single, counterintuitive choice not to pick up the phone. So I put the coffee down, and I started very quietly to follow the money. I want to describe what that quiet actually felt like, because it is the most important and least understood part of these stories. Everyone imagines that the strong response to betrayal is the explosive one, the confrontation, the thrown phone, the scene. But explosion is what the betrayer is prepared for. Kyle, on some level, had surely braced for the day I'd find out, and in his imagined version of that day, I would call him in a rage, and he would get to manage me to soothe, to spin, to half confess and reframe, to turn my fury into the problem. By going quiet instead, I took away the one thing he was ready for. He couldn't manage a reaction I wasn't having. While he went about his day believing his secret was safe, I had a window, a precious closing window in which I knew everything and he knew nothing. In that asymmetry was all of my power, and I was not going to spend it on the temporary satisfaction of yelling. I was going to spend it on getting free. Day 2. Where it went. This is the part that turned my shock into something much harder and much clearer. Because the money had not vanished into some emergency, some debt, some secret he was ashamed of for an understandable reason. I traced the withdrawals, and they led somewhere specific. They led, every single thread of them, to a woman named Bianca. There were the dinners and the weekends, the ordinary furniture of an affair. But it was worse than that, and more deliberate. A large chunk of our house deposit, the deposit for the home Kyle and I were going to build a life in, had gone toward a deposit on an apartment. Her apartment. He had taken the money we saved for our front door and used it to put a key in her hand. I want to describe what that quiet actually felt like. There was a particular detail that broke something in me. And I'll share it because I think it's the kind of thing that turns grief into resolve. Among the transactions, I found the dates. And the dates lined up with conversations I remembered. There was a withdrawal from the week Kyle had sat across from me at dinner and said, gently, that maybe we should hold off on house hunting a little longer, that the market was rough, that we should be patient and keep saving. I had agreed. I had reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I had felt so aligned with him in that moment, two careful people protecting our shared dream. And the whole time, he was not protecting the dream. He was spending it. He had looked me in the eye and counseled patience about a fund he was actively draining for another woman. That's the thing about discovering a betrayal all at once. It doesn't just reveal the present. It reaches backward and poisons your memories, rewriting tender moments into performances. The dinner where I felt closest to him became, in an instant, the dinner where he lied to my face most smoothly. You grieve not just the future then. You grieve the past you thought you'd had. Let me say that again, because it is the cruelest geometry I have ever encountered. The down payment on our shared future became, transaction by transaction, the down payment on her separate one. He didn't just spend our dream. He converted it, dollar for dollar, into hers. I sat with that arithmetic for a long time, and the more I looked at it, the more it told me about how Kyle actually saw our marriage. Because spending money on an affair is one thing reckless, selfish, common, but specifically taking the house deposit, the single most sacred shared symbol of our future, and routing it into an apartment for her was something colder than recklessness. It was a choice about which future was real to him. For 6 years, I had believed we were both saving toward the same front door. He had quietly decided somewhere along the way that the real front door was hers, and that our fund was just a convenient place to keep the money until he was ready to use it for the life he actually wanted. I wasn't a partner he was cheating on. I was, in his private accounting, a savings account he hadn't closed yet. Understanding that did something useful to me. It burned away the last of my desire to save the marriage, and left behind something clean and focused, the desire to save myself. If your stomach just dropped the way mine did tracing those transactions, do me one quick favor before I tell you what I did next. Tap like and subscribe to the channel. I'm not asking for nothing. These calm, real-time revenge stories get buried by the algorithm unless people actually engage, and your one tap is the only reason the next one reaches a woman who is, this morning, staring at an account that doesn't add up. And believe me, what I did with the one thing Kyle loved most is the part you are going to want to see. Day 2. Late. Before I tell you about the lawyer, I have to tell you about the night in between. Because it was the hardest one. I lay awake next to a sleeping Kyle, a man who had no idea his entire life was about to change. Sleeping the easy sleep of someone who thinks he's gotten away with it, and I held my secret in the dark. And it was almost unbearable. Every part of me wanted to shake him awake and scream. But I'd made my choice, and I kept it. And somewhere in those sleepless hours, the grief finished turning into something colder and far more useful. A plan. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't a devastated wife anymore. I was a woman with an appointment. Day 3. The lawyer and the title. I did not confront Kyle. Instead, I took my quiet, cold morning of evidence to a divorce attorney, and what she told me reorganized everything. The first thing she told me, what Kyle had done has a name in divorce law, and the name is not friendly to him. Secretly spending shared marital savings on an affair is called dissipation, and courts take a very dim view of it. The money he'd drained wasn't only ours in a romantic sense, half of it was legally mine, and he had spent my half on another woman's apartment. That, documented, was going to cost him dearly. You didn't lose that money, she said. He owes it back. The only question is how you recover it. That sentence reframed my entire situation, and I want to pass the reframing on. Because it's the thing that pulled me out of the role of victim and into the role of someone with options. Up to that moment, I had experienced the drained account purely as a loss, something done to me. A wound. A theft I'd simply have to absorb. My lawyer's framing flipped it. It wasn't a loss. It was a debt. He hadn't destroyed that money. He had borrowed it from me without permission. And the law had ways of making him pay it back. The instant you stop seeing a betrayal as a wound and start seeing it as a debt to be collected, your whole posture changes. You stop grieving and start strategizing. You stop asking why and start asking how. I walked into that office a heartbroken woman who'd been robbed. I walked out a creditor with a plan. And then she asked me a question that changed the whole story. She asked what major assets we owned, and I told her about the house fund, now gone, and the ordinary things. And then, almost as an afterthought, I mentioned the car. Because there was a car. Kyle's car. A classic. The project he'd poured years, and a frankly absurd amount of love into weekends in the garage. Parts ordered from across the country, the thing he washed more tenderly than he'd touched me in a year. He loved that car in a way that, honestly, I'd made peace with long ago. It was the one thing in the world Kyle truly cherished. I should be honest about that car and what it had come to mean in our marriage, because it matters to why selling it landed the way it did. For the last couple of years, that car had quietly become a symbol of everything that was wrong between us. Kyle had endless time, energy, and tenderness for it, and less for me. He'd disappear into the garage for entire weekends. He remembered every specification of that engine and forgot our anniversary. He'd touch the curve of that hood with a care he hadn't shown me in longer than I wanted to admit. I had told myself it was harmless, a hobby, a man and his project. But sitting in that lawyer's office, I understood the car differently. It wasn't just a thing he loved. It was a thing he loved instead of me, openly, for years, while also loving Bianca secretly. The car was the visible half of how little room was left for me in my own marriage. So when it turned out to be legally mine, it didn't feel like petty revenge to sell it. It felt like finally reclaiming the attention, the resources, the love that had been pouring into everything except me. And here is the detail Kyle had completely forgotten. Years earlier, when he'd first bought it, his credit was a mess, so we'd financed and titled the car in my name. Mine, I paid the insurance on it, in my name, every month. On paper legally, completely that car, the one thing Kyle loved most in the world, belonged to me. My lawyer looked at me, and she said, very calmly, "Then that is your asset to sell. Selling it to recover the money he took from you is entirely your right. I'd document everything, and I'd do it properly, but that car is legally yours." Day 4. The sale. I want to be honest about the morning of day 4, because it wasn't gleeful. I stood in the garage looking at that car for a long time. Not because I had any doubt I didn't, but because selling it felt like the moment our marriage actually physically ended, more than any account balance had. This was the thing he loved, and I was about to let it go. But then I thought about Bianca's apartment, paid for with the front door of my dream home, and the doubt evaporated. He had sold our future in secret. I was going to sell his treasure in the open, legally, in my own name, to buy back the half he'd stolen from me. So I did it. I had the car appraised properly, I found a serious buyer who'd been circling cars like it for years, and I sold it cleanly, at a fair price, entirely within my rights as the person whose name was on the title. It took 2 days of careful, quiet work, the appraisal, the listing, the buyer, the paperwork, and the whole time my heart was in my throat. Because I knew that if Kyle wandered into the garage before it was done, the window would slam shut. So I moved fast but flawlessly. I kept every receipt. I documented the appraisal so no one could ever claim I'd sold it cheap out of spite. I made sure the transfer was clean and the title signed over properly, because the entire point was to do something he could never ever undo or attack. By the time the buyer drove it away, there was no version of events in which I'd done anything wrong, and no version in which Kyle got the car back. It was finished before he ever knew it had started. The money went straight into an account in my name only. The exact thing Kyle had loved most became the exact thing that made me whole again. I stood in the empty garage after the buyer drove off, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph exactly, but a deep, quiet rightness. The feeling of a scale finally coming level. For years, that garage had been the place my husband poured himself into something that wasn't me. Now it was empty, and the emptiness wasn't a loss. It was space. It was the first cleared ground of a life I was about to build on my own terms. There is a kind of justice that is loud, and a kind that is quiet and perfectly balanced. And this was the second kind. The loud kind feels good for an evening. The balanced kind changes your life. I was after the second. He turned our future into her apartment. I turned his treasure back into my future. I keep using the word legally, and I want to dwell on why it matters so much. Because it's the difference between a revenge story that ends well and one that ends in a courtroom with the wrong person in trouble. It would have been so easy and so tempting to do something rash to damage the car, to confront Bianca, to drain whatever was left in some account of his, to make a scene that felt like justice. And every one of those impulses would have handed Kyle exactly what he needed, a way to point at me and say, "See? She's unstable. She's vindictive. Look what she did." The single most important discipline in my entire 5 days was refusing every satisfying but reckless option in favor of the boring, bulletproof one. I sold a car that was legally mine at a fair price with documentation to recover money I was legally owed. There is nothing in that sentence anyone can attack. I didn't break a rule, bend a rule, or even come near a rule. And that spotlessness is what made the outcome unshakable. Rage feels powerful. Lawful precision is powerful. Only one of them holds up the next morning. Day 5. The discovery. This was the only part I didn't plan, because I didn't have to. I just had to wait for him to walk into the garage. Kyle found out the way you'd expect he went into the garage. I was in the kitchen when I heard the side door, then a long silence, then his footsteps coming fast. He stood in the doorway, white-faced, and he said the car was gone, somebody had taken the car, we needed to call the police. And I said, very calmly, "No one took it. Kyle, I sold it." The confusion on his face was almost worth the whole marriage. He actually looked relieved for half a second, as if I'd solved the mystery, and then it curdled. You can't sell my car," he said. And I said the sentence I had been carrying for 2 days. It was never your car. It's in my name. It always has been. And I sold it to put back the money you took out of our house fund, the money you spent on Bianca's apartment. I just balanced the books. I watched him understand, in stages, like a man reading a verdict one line at a time. Exactly how completely the ground had moved. That I knew about the account. That I knew about Bianca. That I knew about the apartment. That the one thing he thought was untouchably his had never legally been his at all. And that while he'd been quietly dismantling our future for months. I had rearranged the entire board in 5 days, in the open, without breaking a single rule. There was a flicker in the middle of his panic where I saw him try to find the version of this where he was the victim. You could watch him reaching for it. "My car, you sold my car, how could you?" And for 1 second, I think he genuinely believed it might work. That he could make the conversation about the car instead of about the house fund, about my action instead of his betrayal. It is a remarkable thing to watch a person who has stolen your future attempt to be outraged that you balanced the books. But the math wouldn't let him. Every time he reached for his own grievance, the drained account and Bianca's apartment were just sitting there, enormous. Undeniable, making his outrage look like exactly what it was. A man upset that the person he robbed turned out to have a way to collect. He couldn't sustain it. The role of victim was simply not available to him, no matter how badly he wanted it, and I watched him slowly realize that too. He tried, of course. The explanations came, it wasn't what it looked like. He was going to put the money back. I'd overreacted by selling the car. But there is no explanation that survives a drained house fund and a paper trail ending at another woman's front door. And there is no overreaction in lawfully selling your own legally titled car to recover money that was stolen from you. The facts were simply, completely on my side. And the calmer I stayed, the more obvious that became. The divorce moved quickly, because dissipation is exactly the kind of thing that makes a divorce move quickly in the wronged party's favor. The documented spending on Bianca did him no favors at all. I recovered my share of everything, and the car money, his treasure, converted became the foundation of a down payment on a home, a smaller one, a quieter one, but entirely, legally, unshakably mine. I closed on that home almost a year later, and I want to tell you about the moment I got the keys, because it's the real ending of this story, the one that matters more than anything that happened to Kyle. I stood in the empty front room of a place that was small and a little imperfect and completely only mine, and I thought about the 6 years I'd spent saving for a front door I believed I'd share with him. And I realized I'd gotten the front door after all, just not the one I'd planned, and not with the person I'd planned it with. It was better, because every inch of it was honest. There was no secret account, no quiet draining, no other front door hiding somewhere across town. Just mine, paid for with what was lawfully mine, earned back from a man who thought he'd already spent my future. Standing there with those keys, I didn't feel like someone who'd lost a marriage. I felt like someone who'd finally stopped funding a lie and started funding a life. Bianca, I heard, was somewhat less enchanted with Kyle once the man who'd put a deposit on her apartment turned out to be a soon-to-be divorced man with no car, no house fund, and a court order to repay his ex-wife. There's not much romance left in a grand gesture once everyone learns it was bought with stolen money and paid for by selling the thing he loved. And if you'll let me leave you with one thing, not as someone who got revenge, but as a woman who watched 6 years of a shared dream get spent on someone else's front door, it's this. When someone steals your future, you do not have to chase them, or scream at them, or beg them to explain. You have to get quiet, find out exactly what is legally yours, and use it to rebuild. Know what you own. Know whose name is on what. The most powerful response to betrayal is almost never the loudest one, it's the one made calmly, in the daylight, completely within your rights, that leaves the other person with nothing to argue against. The people who truly love you will never spend your shared future in secret. The ones who do have already told you exactly how much that future was worth to them. Believe them, and then go build a better one without them. And one more thing. The practical lesson underneath the emotional one. Know whose name is on what. Know it today, before you ever need to. The title of that car, a piece of paper Kyle had forgotten about for years, was the single hinge the whole story turned on. Most people have no idea what is in their own name and what isn't, what they could access and what they couldn't, until the day it suddenly matters more than anything. Don't be most people. Quietly, calmly, know the architecture of your own life. Not because you expect betrayal, but because the people who know where they stand are the ones who can move the instant they need to. There's one more thing, though. A few weeks after the sale, the man who bought the car called me not about the car itself, but about something he'd found tucked inside it, in a hidden compartment Kyle thought no one knew about. What was in that compartment revealed that the house fund was not the first thing Kyle had quietly drained, and not the only secret he'd been keeping. What I found, and what I did once I understood how long this had really been going on, is a story entirely its own. And it might just be the most satisfying one yet. It's right there on your screen. You are going to want to see how that one ends.